Hello, everybody. What's going on? Hope you guys have been having a great day today. Today's fun little thing is called building blocks. And we're going to be going over what a building block is and how you create them. And this is something, as you go on and become a Pilates instructor, you really need to know how to do so you can make all the exercise accessible for every client, because every exercise in Pilates has a building block that you can do to make your person successful. So a building block is basically a way to make an exercise more accessible to a client who may be too tight or too weak to do something, or maybe they don't have a powerhouse and they're not connected, so they're very unstable, or things are just a little bit hard. And you want to make the building blocks because you want every client to be successful. So rather than just skip exercises and say, oh, you can't do this, you want to find out a way that they can do it so that eventually they can go through those building blocks, get rid of the building blocks, and do the ideal version of the exercise. So there are a few ways to create a building block, and one of them is working more proximal than distal. So if my arms are way out here, things are harder than if my arms are nice and tight. So that's your proximal to distal. Sometimes people refer to that as your lever length. So the lever of my arm is long and away, and when it's short and in, it's much easier. So sometimes you'll take your arms, they're up here in an exercise, and maybe you'll put them behind your head to make them a little bit easier. Or maybe you'll bring them in down here to make them a little bit easier, or maybe down towards your lap. So that's the proximal to distal. Another thing is just simply range of motion. You might make something just a little bit smaller. So you might do your circles a little bit smaller. You might do your big leg movements a little bit smaller. So things are smaller range of motion, so you can do it a little bit more controlled. And another thing is working with gravity instead of against it. So when you lie down on your back, you're working with gravity because your abs and everything is pulling into gravity. And when you flip over onto your stomach, you're working against gravity because you have to pull your abs away from gravity. Well, that can work with some other exercises and other positioning. I'm going to show you what that means. And that's working, not coming up, but going down on something, because coming down into gravity is a little bit easier. So we're going to look at a few different exercises and talk about different ways that you can modify them and what they're for. So the very first one I'm going to do is the 100. And before we begin, some of you have already met Mark before, but he's volunteered to come in today again to help us. Woo! So let's give him a big round of applause and some shout outs. Yay! So Mark Gates works here at the studio, and he's a level 3 comprehensive trainer. And yeah, that's about all I have to say. But he's volunteered his time, so let's thank him a lot. All right, Mark, you're going to lay down, and we're going to talk about the 100. So as I mentioned before, that working proximal to distal makes an exercise easier. So we're going to do that. We're going to go through the building blocks. So his legs are going to be bent to begin with. The first thing we're going to do is lift his head up, and he's going to begin pumping his arms. So right now, two things are happening. He's proximal, meaning his knees and his head are close to the center line. So the leather length, go ahead and extend your legs out, are not out long, but they're in nice and tight. And the other thing is he's working with gravity, because instead of his legs being off the ground, just lift your feet up for a second, and he's working against gravity with his legs are on the ground. So gravity's assisting him. So this is a great way to building block. Now he's ready. It's been a few weeks and he's ready to go on. He can bring his knees to the chest, again, working proximal. Then he can bring his legs up to the ceiling. It's more distal, but still proximal. His head and feet are as close to the center line. And then he can lower his legs down just a little bit, and he's still pumping. And they go a little further. It's a few months have passed now. And now it's about 6 to 8 months later, and his legs are just hovering off the ground. And there's a couple ways he could come out of this. He could come out of it in a distal movement, which is harder. Or, go ahead and lift your head up, he can come into a proximal transition and place his feet back down and his head down, which is what we did when you took the intro mat class. So that's an example of two things, working with gravity and working proximal to distal. Now we're going to talk about the roll-up. Even transitioning into the roll-up, go ahead and extend your legs for a minute, arms to the ceiling. When you do your first roll-up, you roll up, and that can be really difficult. So we're going to start working with gravity and having gravity be our friend. So I'm going to have him transition a little bit differently. So his hands are down, his legs are bent, and he just finished the building block version of the 100. So go ahead and bend your knees. I'm going to have him roll towards the side towards you, guys, and he's going to push up and sit up, much easier than a roll up, and then sit and face the front. Go ahead, I'm sorry, in front of the mat, sorry, it wasn't clear. And his legs are still bent because we're working proximal and we're going to work with gravity. Legs are closed really tight. So what happens here, his arms are reaching forward. We're working with gravity. It's easier to fall down than get up. We're not going to fall though, we're going to roll. He's just going to curl his tailbone a little bit and just roll a little bit down and roll a little bit up. Keeping nice and round as he does so. He rolls back, so we're working with gravity. He's proximal, his knees and his head are close to his center line, and then he rolls up just a little bit. So he's working with small range of motion as well. I can eventually make that range of motion a little bit bigger, and he can roll down further, and then he can roll up, and then he can roll down further, and then he can roll up. I'm making the range of motion bigger, even though I'm still working with gravity on the down, and I'm challenging to work a little bit against gravity, but he hasn't laid all the way down yet. Now he's going to go all the way down, but his legs are bent. Now we are going to start working against gravity, so we've taken that out, but we're still going to work proximal and with a little bit of assistance. He's going to take his hands underneath his thighs and climb up his legs. So he's climbing up and he's keeping it proximal, and he's climbing down. And again, gravity's helping him in that the gravity of his hands, the pulling of his hands, and he's nice and proximal. And then he rolls back down. Now I'm going to have him come up. Some time has passed and he's getting stronger and more flexible. I'm going to have him extend his legs, and I'm going to have him roll down because he's working with gravity. And then I've kept his arms nice and proximal to his body. Then he's going to bend the legs because he's working against gravity and climb back up using that assistance of his hands. Stretch forward. That's a little bit easier because rolling down is easy and his hands are on the ground. And he bends his knees. And this time we're going to add a little more. He's going to roll up. Go ahead. He's using his thighs. And he extends forward. Extend your legs up. And he's going to roll down. His arms are lifted now, making him a little more distal. They come overhead. They come up. He bends his knees again. Climbs up. Stretches forward with straight legs. Rolls back down, but see, I've taken the arms in a more distal position. And then finally, he'll be able to do a full roll up. Some time has passed, he's ready to go, and he's done his roll up, okay? Let's see what we can look at. Let's get the side kick series. This is a fun one. If you want to roll and face down, we're gonna do a whole bunch of building blocks together. Gonna have his head down, normally it's up, flat. Now he's working with gravity. He's not having to keep his head lifted off of the mat. Legs come to the front corner there. And his hands are here. We're going to start with just simple, actually, go ahead and put your head up for a second. We'll go through there's different building blocks you can do. So let's say that when he does the big kicks, he loses his stability. So I'm going to have him come up, and instead of doing 2 big kicks, I'm going to have him do a little kick and come back. A little kick and come back. Some time's gone on, he can do a little kick, and maybe 1 kick back. Little kick, 1 kick back. Some more time, little kick, little kick, little kick, little kick, and eventually he'll be able to do a larger range of motion. All right, that comes down. Maybe that still was too much, and I want to give him more working with gravity instead of against it. He lays that arm flat. And so he could go through those same things where he does a little kick front and comes back to the center. It's just very simple. And then maybe he does 2 little kicks front and 1 little kick back. And then eventually as weeks go on, he's doing 2 and 2, and then he's doing the big ones. And I feel comfortable now, and I'm going to have him come up onto his head, his elbow, And now we can do the full range of motion and the full exercise. So how can we make this maybe a little more proximal for people? The best thing to do besides the range of motion is to bend the bottom leg. So you bend that bottom leg. We brought that leg into the abs. So again, move the knees and the head towards each other. And he goes through that same process, just a little kicks and a little kick, and then maybe stretches back once, because going back is getting range of motion. And then eventually have him get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and on, woo, until he goes on to the next level of exercise. All right, so one of the things that I want you to really think about is, could you create your own building blocks based on that? So go ahead and line your back for one-legged circle. We're not going to do the building blocks for you. I'm going to show you the ideal version of the exercise. You're going to watch it for your homework. I want you to attempt to create some building blocks. Again, what are the 3 building blocks, things that we can do? We can work more proximal, more towards the center by shortening the levers. You can work with gravity instead of against it, and you can do smaller range of motion. So ideally, the bottom feet are flexed and one leg is up in the air, turned out, and he would do a big circle, crossing his shoulders around and up, shoulders around and up, shoulders around, reverse, out and around and kick me, out and around and kick me. Then he would scissor kick the leg, hard transition. I want you to think about what you could do there, and around and ready to reverse it. What could you do to make this a building block? All right, so go ahead and put that in your homework. This will be in the unit section, and you can go out over there and do that. Let's give Mark a big thank you, and I just wanted to talk to you guys a little bit more. Again, I mentioned this the last few days. This is one of our last days, that if you are thinking about getting your teacher training, I would love to continue with you on your journey. If you have any questions, you can ask me. One of the things that you still can do is, and I hope you all do, is you can set up a one-on-one, either Zoom call or video call or a one-on-one phone call or FaceTime or whatever works for you. On the worksheet, the workbook, or in the workbook, I should say, I think it's towards the bottom, there's a live link to my schedule that you can just press and you can set up an appointment. And to make it live, obviously it's not live if you print it out, but you can go into the email and pull up the Word document and just press it, and you can make it live and set up your schedule with me in the next couple of days. If you've not, let me know, because that schedule may be filled, or it could be a couple days old, or different things happen, but go ahead and just send me a private message, and I will make sure that I send you a new calendar out to update that. So let's make sure, if you've not gotten your calls in already, most of you have, that you've done that. And then if you're interested in getting your training, that I have put the latest dates in there for you. You can look over that. Also the link to sign up for your first module. And if you sign up by this Friday, you get a free private session with one of our trainers here in person. You can choose to do it Zoom, but hopefully you'll choose to do it in person. Anyways, it's been great. And please, if you've not already, let's set up your one-on-one calls. All right, thanks you guys. Love you. Hope I see you soon.